The following story has been brought to you by StoriesToInspire.org.
The story I'm about to share with you, I heard from my father, Zatal, many years ago, some probably 30 years ago. It made a very deep impression on me, but I could never, ever share that story because I did not know 100%. I hadn't heard it firsthand. My father came home, said it over from the butcher who had a store down the street from me. I knew this individual, but I had never heard the story from him. And he said over the story. My father came home and said the story. For years I wanted to share the story because it's such an amazing message, but I could never do so because I didn't hear it firsthand. A number of years ago, through great Hashgacha Pratis, I met somebody. The reasons for our meeting turned out not to be relevant, but while we were talking, I identified that this individual is a granddaughter of that butcher about whom I had heard that story. And I asked her, I said, there's a story that's been banging around in my head for a long time, and I've never been able to say it over because I never knew if it was true. And I've been waiting to meet a descendant of this individual and try to verify the facts of the story. Can you tell me if you've ever heard this? And I told her the story, and she smiled broadly. And she said, my grandfather was a Chassidish Yid, and Matzah Shabbos, Chassidim have a minhag, they say over stories. Many a Matzah Shabbos, he said over the story, he would constantly repeat the story. I know the story well, and I know the details, and you've got it to a T. So let me tell you this story. This Yid grew up in Europe before the war, and he was a bacher. He was a bacher when the war broke out, 15, 16, 17, around then. And one day the Nazis, Yamach Shemam V'Zichram, came and encircled the town, took all the Yidden and herded them into a shul. And while they were doing it, this Yid, he was a yeshiva bacher, and he was davening along with some of his friends. They were davening and crying to the Rebbeinu Shalom to save them. And there were some other Yidden who were there, and unfortunately they didn't possess his level of Emunah. And they said, be quiet, now you're going to daven. What are you davening for? What are you davening over here? What do you think you're going to accomplish? The Nazis are going to kill us all. And that's what was happening. There was no question that that's what was happening. They watched as the Nazis took cans of gasoline and started to pour it all around the base medrash, the base Knesset, where they were all locked into. And there was no way out. And their plans were very clear. Their intent was clear. They were going to burn them. And this is something the Nazis did many times to many, countless tens of thousands of Yidden. And this Yid said, I was screaming at him, and I said, what is your problem? Why do you say that we're doomed? We're not doomed. A sharp sword, this is what Chazal say. It's not too late. We still have to daven. And they laughed at him, and they said, it's too late. And he said, it's never too late. We're alive. We have our breath. We can still daven. And they continued to daven. The Yid said, the Nazis had finished dousing the shul with gasoline, and they were ready to light it up. And suddenly, they hear the roar of a truck pull up. And all of a sudden, it's like quiet outside. And they hear somebody, they're looking out the window, and they see that out of the truck comes what appeared to be a very high-ranking Wehrmacht officer. And he looks at these SS men, these Rishayim Gemurim, and he says to them, what are you doing? What are you doing? And they said, what do you mean? We're killing the Jews. He says, what do you think you're doing? They said, we're lighting up the place on fire. He says, no, you're not. No, you're not. You're not lighting anything on fire. What are you people out of your minds? You're a bunch of murderers. That's not what you do. These are people. What are you doing? You let them go right now. They had a whole argument. They had a whole fight, but the Wehrmacht officer was higher ranking than they were. And they had no choice. And they unlocked the doors to the Beis HaKnesses. And the people were able to go home that night. And he said, I was there. I was the one having the argument together with some of my friends. We were arguing and saying, we were on our last seconds before our lives were to be taken from us. And the Rebbeinu Shalom, the Rebbeinu Shalom helped us. The Rebbeinu Shalom saved us. He says, I'm living proof of that Chazal, of that Maimer Chazal, and how emes it is. So Rabbi said, I don't care what it is. I don't care what Yeshua you need. Because we all need a Yeshua. Some need little Yeshuas, some need big Yeshuas. Some of us will need big Yeshuas. Every one of us has to remember when Chazal say, when the Torah says, never stop davening. Never give up. You can't ever give up. Sure, Hashem Rabban Shalom can help us. Rabban Shalom will absolutely, what he'll do, that's up to him. What he can do, he can do anything. Never assume that whatever it is that you're going through is irreversible. There's nothing klapi shmaya. There's nothing kamei shmaya. There's nothing before the Rabban Shalom that's irreversible. Whatever it is that we need, the Yeshua la'asad lavai is going to come when it looks irreversible. Every Yeshua, every big Yeshua we've had has been in the face of tremendous, tremendous adversity. And just as the Rabban Shalom was Mashiach us then, he will continue to be Mashiach us, and eventually we will be Zoche, Bekar of Mamish, to the Geula Shlema, the real Yeshua, the Yeshua of La'asad Lavai Mashiach Tzidkenu B'mehera B'yameinu. Amen. Thank you so much for listening, and have a wonderful, wonderful week.
Enjoyed this story? Come again. Bring a friend. StoriesToInspire.org